So yeah, without further ado, Miller, over to you. Take it away.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the invite. Yeah, so my name is Miller McSwain. Like Liam said, I'm a co-living investor, which I'll explain kind of what that is in a little while. But it's basically, yeah, just a high cash flow strategy. That's all you need to know for now. And yeah, so my wife and I live in Colorado Springs, and we have six co-living properties here. It's the only strategy that we use for the most part. Um, I'll get into that, but yeah, it's like 95% co-living. So that's six properties, and that's 41 rooms across town. So this is a room rental strategy that we use. And yeah, just some background. I'm a former nuclear rocket scientist, switched over to full-time real estate like probably 6 months ago now. And then most recently wrote the book for Bigger Pockets about co-living. It's called Co-Living Cash Flow, and that comes out in April, I think is what we're shooting for. So there'll be some links later if anyone's interested in signing up for the book or anything like that. But really, it's just a great resource. It's nothing I really get paid a lot for or anything like that. It's just to help get the word out about this strategy. Um, yeah, and feel free. I assume we have like an active chat, so if people want to ask questions during, feel free to do that, and we'll have a spot at the end too. But the more if we're on a slide and you have a question about it, go ahead and feel free to ask then, so I can kind of answer it without having to flip back and everything. So yeah, feel free to be interactive. All right. So here's kind of a little bit about co-living. So it is a room rental strategy, but it's different than like the boarding house type thing that you might be thinking of. It's not like we're cramming a bunch of people in a house just to maximize income. We actually do sacrifice some income in order to make the experience better. So co-living stands for community living. So if you guys are familiar with pad split, they've been kind of getting popularized recently. So I would consider that more of like a boarding house type model that they typically use, where yeah, you buy a 2,000 square foot house, we'll say, and you turn it into an 8 bedroom house. And you do that by getting rid of all shared spaces. Like that's one thing that they advocate for. It's like, okay, let's turn the living room into a bedroom. Let's turn the dining room. Let's turn any extra family rooms into bedrooms. And that's how they get a lot of cash flow. So instead, this is community living. So we have a living room, and we have community events. We do things like game nights and movie nights and all of that. So really trying to enhance the experience for the residents, because the typical resident that we see for this strategy is someone who's new, young and new to town typically. So it's like they're moving here and they don't have any friends yet. They don't know anyone. So this is a really good opportunity for us to introduce them to new people, form relationships, potentially form friendships through some of the things that we do with the strategy. That kind of differentiates it from the boarding house type model. But you can see some pictures here. So we're buying really nice houses that we're doing this in, honestly. They're straight off the MLS. There's enough income to where we can afford to buy, these nicer type houses. It's not like we're having to buy anything super small and run down. So usually we're seeing like this house here that you can see on the left. It probably rent for like 2,200 to a family, 2,400, maybe something like that. But instead we're getting 6,000, probably closer to 7,000 per month by renting it out by the room instead. So, and you can see some pictures of the bedrooms here. So, super nice, clean, all of that. Furnished living room for them to hang out in with the TV and the couch and Netflix and all of that. Kitchen we have furnished just like you would an Airbnb. So, you know, um, pots, bowls, plates, spoons, pretty much anything you need to cook, like besides your food. We provide all of that. Okay, and I just pulled the chat up to leave it on the side too. So yeah, feel free to ask anything. But usually what we're seeing is 1,500 a month in cash flow or more. Our target is 2,000 a month, but some of the earlier ones that we bought, were closer to were less than that. They weren't our best buys. You kind of learn a lot as part of the journey. So, but anyway, it's possible to get 2,000. But just to be safe, I'd say yeah, you could get 1,500 on a lot of places, and you could get 10% cash on cash with these. We're shooting for 14 in particular. But like I said, we have some underperformers too. Cool. So that's just kind of an overview of it and kind of what our places look like. Um, so some pros and cons of the strategy, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Um, the upsides, I would say, the pros are that it's a huge win-win-win-win-win. Like there's a lot of wins in this strategy. As an owner or an investor, super beneficial for us because we're super exceeding the 1% rule if that's kind of what you go by, or you could say we're double or tripling our income, super high cash flow, right? Where we're getting paid um, for the strategy a lot more than with others. And I would say the residents, like the renters, win as well. Because if you do this right in the way that I teach it and is in the book and kind of like a standard I'm trying to set for this strategy, is that it is very high quality for the renter. All inclusive, they have their rent paid for, their internet, their water, um, we have a cleaner that comes through on a monthly basis, like that's paid for. Lawn care, whatever. It's like they pay and then, weight's off their shoulders. They can just focus on, work or friends or whatever they want to focus on. Um, and it's super cheap. So that's really the big benefit. That's where a lot of residents come in. It's like, I don't want to pay for an apartment or a studio, so I'll just rent a room instead, which is like, depending on the market, like half the cost. So that's a huge win for them. And then also, I just think the city that you operate in wins as well because in a lot of cities, a lot of metros, especially, there's just not any product. I mean, there's just no product that's close to the price point of rooms. And in a lot of cities, most cities, that's desperately needed. Some other upsides. I just saw a question come in, so I'll answer that in a sec. Some other upsides: vacancy absorption is huge. So it's just we have like very diversified income stream. So rather than renting this house to a single family, even say we let's assume that we got the same income, which of course, like I said, we get 2 to 3x more. But just to keep it simple, say that a family would pay the 6 to 7 thousand a month as well. The issue is that as soon as they leave, we have a month or two where we're turning the unit and trying to get it refilled. And during that time, you're gonna have to dip into your reserves. Hopefully you have them. You'd have to dip into your reserves. Instead, since we have that $6 or $7 thousand a month, kind of like fractionalized between six, seven, 8 people, one person leaves, no big deal. We can literally still pay our mortgage and our utilities if someone leaves without even worrying about reserves. Like you should still have them, but we can have 2 people leave. We can still pay for that. We can have 3 people leave. We can probably still pay for it. So there's very few scenarios where we have to dig into reserves. Like I said, still have them, but it's just a much steadier and diversified income stream. Same like if you had a fourplex, like that's a benefit of having a fourplex over a single family, right? Some other ones I'll hit on here, recession resistant. So we've operated these when, the economy was like not doing super well, and then it was doing well, and then it wasn't doing so well again. So it's worked throughout all of those. I think in particular in down economies, this tends to work really well. But we've seen it work in up economies as well. But just because in the down economies, people in their A class apartments move to B, B moves to C, C moves down. But the interesting thing is we're not catching the C residents because we're providing like an A class experience just with at a much cheaper price and the trade-off of having to share some space. But it's not like we're catching the C residents though, just because we do screen well. We tend to have really good residents. I would say like 95% of them are fantastic. But there are some downsides. So management intensity is definitely one of them. This is a very management intensive strategy, and that's why it pays well. Um, and we'll dive into some management things later. You do have a little bit increased startup cost. So furnishings for sure. In a long-term rental, you wouldn't need furnishings. You're definitely going to be furnishing the living room, kitchen. You might be furnishing the bedrooms with this strategy. Kind of depends a little bit, and we can chat about that. Typically, we don't, but there's some markets where you might want to. And then the last downside is potentially ordinances or like regulations against co-living. So the only regulation that tends to affect us is some cities and states will have laws against a certain number of unrelated people living in a house. Um, there's states where it's totally fine. Colorado is one of them. Colorado, Washington, and Oregon have passed at the state level, rules or regulations or whatever that prevent cities from setting those caps. Um, some cities don't care. Like I know Houston doesn't care. And there's some others. And then there's a lot of cities that just don't that technically do have a regulation, but they don't actually enforce it. So, you know, determine your own risk tolerance and all of that. whether that's worth a risk, chat with investors in the area, see if they've heard of it being enforced and make sure that you do the strategy well. But I will say there are some cities that are totally against this. And that would be Fort Worth, Texas is like hard against this right now. Um, but there's a lot of places that are friendly to it as well. But that could be a problem depending on the market. Okay, question here. Have you seen any municipalities and cities try to legislate co-living models like they do with STRs? Um, yeah, trying to ban them or make it very difficult. So we see it, I guess I should say, originally, we'll say like 3 years ago, every state and every city was against this, but it's moving towards allowing it. So, like I said, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado passed those statewide rules in the last 3 years. And then there's cities who are passing them, at the city level. Um, so if anything, it's moving towards allowing this while STRs are moving away from it. And the reason for that is, people, local people in a certain city and their elected officials want cheaper housing, right? Like officials talk about it all the time. And this is a incredible way to have cheaper housing. It's turning something meant for, one family into something meant for six, seven, different people. Whereas, short-term rentals do the opposite. It's like it takes housing supply for locals offline and converts it into, hospitality. So, still also a great cash flow strategy. It's just definitely opposes what cities would want typically versus where this is usually what cities would want. So, I would see it continuing to move that way. And I'll dive into some other reasons why right now. Um, so, why co-living right now? So, like I was saying, the big draw for this strategy is unaffordability. So, usually, whenever I'm looking at markets, what I like to look at is what I call the studio unaffordability for the market. So, that's what does a studio apartment cost divided by what is the income of the minimum wage worker in the area. Um, and so the reason that we look at that is we're looking at studios because that is the closest competition that we have. It's like if somebody wants to save money, that is usually their cheapest option, unless there's, room rentals available. And then we are specifically a very large demographic of renter for this strategy is lower income workers. So it's kind of like, with midterm rentals, you probably hear a lot about traveling nurses and like people really target that as their like avatar for their renter. Although there are other types of renters for midterm rentals, that's kind of the low income workers, kind of the traveling nurse for this strategy. It's like that's probably 60, 70% of the people nationwide that would rent a room, but there are other people too. Um, that we can go into later. But this is a good one to focus on whenever you're looking at markets. So you can see that they're spending around 60% of their income right now on, if they were to choose a studio apartment, around 60% of their income would go to the rent. And most personal finance experts say that you need to be spending around 30. So it's really high. Like there's no room for them to save, invest, get ahead in life. It's like they have to spend it on rent and then they have to buy groceries. And that's about it. And it is ticking up slightly, but it's pretty flat around 62% or so. So it's very high. Potential solutions for this that are not really solutions. These are solutions to show you that co-living is the best solution. But one of them is we'll assume here that incomes rise while rents stay constant. So in reality, this doesn't happen. Rents continue to rise almost every year. Incomes rise not every year. So this is a very extreme scenario to explain this. But even in that case, it would take like 70 years for them to reach that affordability threshold if their incomes kept going up and rents were to stay constant. So it's technically a solution, but like obviously that's not going to happen. The second potential solution would be we'll say that incomes stay constant while rents decrease. I think this is even less likely. Rents rarely decrease. So in this, I modeled like a 5% decrease per year, which is huge, huge. So again, it's an extreme example to showcase this. But even in that case, it would still take 20 years or so to reach affordability levels. So really the only solution I see is providing a totally new type of asset for them to rent, and that is the rooms. Any questions on kind of the unaffordability piece? why it's working today and why it's going to keep working. This basically shows that it's going to keep working. So it's going to take a long time to fix the issue. Okay, cool. Um, all right. So kind of if you're seeking cash flow and you're buying small residential properties, single families, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, usually what you're considering is doing a long-term rental, not really a cash flow play, but like kind of an easy play. But then the other three strategies are more cash flow heavy. So midterm rentals, short-term rentals, and co-living. And so you can see on this chart here kind of a revenue comparison of each of those. And this is based on Colorado Springs, based on buying a single family, and based on purchasing a five-bedroom house. So, like if you were to buy a short-term rental in a non-metro market, like in a vacation market, okay, it would probably outperform co-living there for sure. Um, so there's scenarios to this. But if you're looking at like buying in a metro, we see that, and there's sources cited all throughout this slide deck. But co-living and short-term rentals are very close on cash flow. Um, in fact, co-living eked it out a little bit. It's hard to tell, but they're very close. And then midterms fall behind that, and then long-term rentals fall behind that. And I will say, management intensity kind of goes up with revenue. So long-term rentals, super easy to manage. Not a lot to it. Fill it up once every year, once every 2 years, and then put some hours in as far as the turnover goes, and that's about it. Midterms, you have a little bit more work. You're finding someone new every 3 months. And then there's short term and co living, which would be the highest management, highest cash flow here. Um, I would say that they're both high management, but just in different ways. So, like with short term rentals, right, you have a turnover every 3 days, every 5 days, something like that. So you're always looking for a new person. With co living, it's a little more front heavy on the management. So you buy a place, you fill it up with six people, and it takes a while and a lot of work to find six different, people, six different leases to sign and come on board. So that takes a lot of work there. But then it's kind of easygoing after that. Then yeah, like I said, it's kind of diversified. So you have to pick someone up every once in a while, but not everyone, leaves all at the same time. So it's a little bit easier after that. Um, but still both high management. Do you recommend targeting a specific bedroom count as the minimum to consider? So I do not. I'll dive into it further in a little bit, but I don't care how many bedrooms a property currently has. Like we've bought 3,000 square foot places, uh, actually 3,300 square foot places that were only three bedrooms, which sounds like terrible for the strategy. But we went in and just built bedrooms in certain places. Like I said, we still leave a living room, so we have community space. But there's like unfinished basements that you can convert. In Colorado, there's a living room, but then there's a family room, and then there's a sitting room, and then there's another living room. So houses can have some potential to do that. So yeah, I do not care how many bedrooms there currently are. Where we usually see the cash flow to start to turn worth it. So it probably turns positive at like four bedrooms or five bedrooms. It's six and seven is when we start to see where it's really worth the effort to put in. That meaning, yeah, we're at that like 10% cash on cash kind of mark. Um, but I don't care how many it currently has. It's like you're gonna have to look at every property that comes across and meets your filters and look and see how many bedrooms can it have, and then run your analysis based on that. What if all tenants want to purchase their room rather than lease? What do you mean purchase their room? Can you clarify that? Okay. And then, yeah, we talked a little bit about the legality. So long-term rentals, totally legal. Midterm rentals, for the most part, what I know, pretty much legal. Everyone else. Short-term rentals, trending towards not legal in cities and metros. Co-living trending towards legal in cities and metros. Okay. Any high-level questions on the strategy itself, I guess, before I dive into specifics? I should have put a table of contents in here, but I plan on talking about, oh, like a condo, purchase of rooms rather than lease. Yeah, no, that's not something we can really do, right? So, because this is a single family house with individual rooms in it. So there's not really a way to parcel off the rooms and sell them, um, like you could with a condo. Or even like, I hear about people buying duplexes and then uh, splitting them into two addresses and selling them off individually. That's not something we can really do with the rooms. So no, only lease. Okay, another one here. When you're looking for solid co-living areas slash markets, is there a ratio, average rent to income that you look for in the demographics? Ah, very good. So I am going to dive into that in a little bit. I am going to dive into that. Uh, am I going to talk about how to leverage the Coffee Closers platform? I will have a Coffee Closers team member hop in on that maybe towards the end of the presentation and see what they say. Okay, so finding a co-living property. So first off, what to look for in a market, just like we had Ray Vega asking a second ago. Um, okay, so like I mentioned, the first thing I look for is that studio unaffordability. So that's whatever the monthly studio rent is divided by the salary in the area. You can get studio rents from apartments.com. I think they mentioned that they'll send these slides out or a video, so you can come back and check this out. But I just Google apartments.com, Colorado Springs average studio rent, and then you'll find a page that shows that gives that info. And then annual salary. Usually I use PayScale is where I like to try to get it from. Um, and you can search for that on Google also. Okay, and then room rent to price ratio. So historically, room rents have been very hard to estimate. There hasn't really been, like in the short-term space, there's AirDNA. In the midterm space, I think Furnish Finder has some data, um, kind of on what rents are in a certain area. There's been nothing like that for rooms, but this is like barely live. Me and a partner just launched this. We're basically making a co-living property management software because there isn't one that exists yet. To kind of be like a hospitable equivalent like in the short-term space. That'll have like a bunch of super cool room-specific features. But we just launched like the dynamic pricing and like rent calculator piece for it. So you guys feel free to go to, I think it'll work. I mean, it's literally in development, but I just put it on here for you guys. So if you go to colivingpro.io/rent calculator, you can type in your city and it should we don't have a ton of data yet across the US, but it'll give you at least an answer and tell you how confident it is. In some cities, it's like pretty low confidence right now. So anyway, you can get a quick and easy estimate by checking that out. Otherwise, you can, comp on Facebook. Facebook Marketplace is where a lot of rooms are. Zillow even has, thank you for pasting that link in the chat. Zillow even has a room rental section now as of the last 6 or 12 months or so. So that's another good place you could go to comp what the room rents are. Okay, and then purchase price, you can go to Zillow to find that. So, someone asked what's a good like room rent to price ratio. Um, Usually the way that I like to run it is just a single room divided by the purchase price. Now that's going to show up way less than 1%, but it really depends on how many rooms you can get in a house. So like in our market, we rent for around 800 a month on average, and our purchase prices are like 500,000. So that's like 0.1%, right? So that doesn't sound good. But then when you take into account, in reality, you're going to have more rooms than that, then that's whenever it starts to look more attractive. Um, okay. Demographics. So like I mentioned, low income workers are a big one. That's like our typical class that you would rent to. But there's also college students, right? You could use this strategy around a university. The big one that we do here in Colorado Springs is renting to military members. We're probably 60 or 70% military and then 30% low income workers. And by low income workers, what I mean is our typical low income worker is like a elementary school teacher, social worker, construction worker, those sorts of jobs. Like still really good people. They just make 60 grand a year or less is usually what we see. Um, but yeah, military members can be another great one though. Like we have 4 military bases here. And then the last thing you'll want to look up favorable occupancy laws to make sure that you fall in line with, like I said, a lot of cities will say, even Colorado Springs, whenever we first started buying here, we had a rule that was 5 unrelated people or less. And honestly, we went over that rule because all the investors I talked to and everyone, no one had ever heard of an issue with that actually being, put into use. It was like an ordinance from the 70s or something that, you know, wasn't really applicable today. But now we're totally good. Does Section 8 assistance apply to the rental model? Yes. I haven't taken any vouchers from anyone. No one's tried to use a Section 8 voucher for any of our rooms. But I did hear that the Section 8 program like officially supports rooms now as of the last 6 months. Maybe people could have used them before, but there's like official support for it now. I don't see it being a super useful. I don't see anyone using a voucher very often for a room because I imagine the voucher will be enough to like get a studio or an apartment just because like that's the way the system's set up, especially if they have like one kid or two kids or something. But there might be some cases where it's a single person with Section 8 and their voucher doesn't cover an apartment. That it might happen. Are you permitting the additional bedrooms? So yeah, that's another like up to you risk kind of thing. The way that what I will say about it is I'll show you guys a floor plan in a little bit of a conversion that we've done. And some bedroom additions that we do are totally useful to us. If we can build a room for $4,000 and it brings us an extra 7,000 a year, like obviously that's worth it. But some room conversions that we do aren't worth it to an end buyer whenever we sell, eventually, hopefully 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Um, so I think it would be kind of awkward to permit those sort of rooms. And then, now the city's like, okay, now it's a 7 bedroom house. Cool. And then whenever you go to sell it, tear that room down, for 2 grand or whatever, so that it sells, so that it's normal now and sells to a family, and then have to go get that inspected again. So the city's like, okay, now it's a 5 bedroom again or whatever. Um, so if it's like a weird bedroom, I think that gets kind of weird on the permitting side. If it's like a permanent addition that you're going to do, and it's like, oh, I'm going to keep this, for whenever we sell eventually, then I think that's more likely you need to get permitted. But regardless, doing any remodels and additions up to code is super important. Would the municipality approve a permit for additional bedrooms in a single family zone? Yeah, I mean, as long as it's up to code, I don't think there's any reason they wouldn't. Even if it's in a place where, say, there's a five unrelated persons ordinance or law or whatever. Say that you were building 3 rooms and you wanted to get them all permitted. So it was a 5 bedroom house and you were building 3 to get it up to 8. There's still no reason they wouldn't approve that as long as it's done correctly. Um, because the ordinance is for unrelated people. So you can have a 8 person family, and need 8 bedrooms. That's fine. There might be some things that permitting would want to check on. Like I was talking with someone recently in North Carolina who was like, said that their property that they're looking at buying is on a septic system, and the septic system is rated for like 4 people, and they wanted to add and permit 2 or 3 rooms. So then whenever the inspector comes out, she said they're probably going to say that they need to upgrade the septic, tank size. So maybe there's some like a few little tricks there, but there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to approve it because it technically could just be 8 related people. Do you convert garages to living space? We have not so far. I think we're going to start a garage conversion and then in the next week or two. So that's another great way to buy a place and get it to cash flow. So again, we still want to keep community space, but if there's a 2,500 square foot house, so this example that I have, where we're about to do a garage conversion, it's like 2,500 square feet, but there's a 3 car garage attached to it, and so that's an extra. It's something like 400 or 500 square feet. So we're finishing that, HVAC, insulation, the whole deal, and building 2 beds and a bath in there. So that can be a way to eke out some extra cash flow. It's just a more expensive remodel than building a room inside of, the existing house, because now you're gonna have to worry about insulation and some things like that. What type of agreement are you signing with your guests? Okay, yeah, this is a great question. So like I mentioned earlier, pad splits kind of been teaching a lot about, they're calling it co-living, but like I said, I don't really consider it co-living because they de disincentivize community. So I don't get how you can call it community living when you do that. Um, Basically, their reasoning is that if you look on their website, they're like, yeah, we encourage not having living rooms and other community spaces to prevent resident conflict. But it's really rare. Like we've had 80 or 100 residents so far, just over the years. And there's two incidents that I can think of. So it's really not that common. But they advocate for not using lease agreements. Instead, they use membership agreements, which it seems like it's proving not to hold up well in court. But basically, instead of having leases, they're operating in cities like Fort Worth, where there are occupancy laws that, go against the co-living strategy. And they were like, well, we're technically not renting to 8 people. Instead, we just have 8 members that live in the house. They don't have leases. So kind of the structure is there's the owner owns the property, and then they essentially rent it to an entity. They rent it to one LLC. So the owner can say, I have one occupant, like it's this LLC. And then that LLC just has members of the LLC, and it's the 8 residents who have no voting rights and no ownership and all of that. So that was the way they were trying to get around it. And they're, saying, oh, it's fine. You can invest anywhere by using these membership agreements. But like I said, Fort Worth is tearing into people left and right. Uh, citing them, fining them, and until they get back within the occupancy limits. So I don't think that's a good path going forward. So yeah, we just use standard leases. I mean, they're not exactly standard, right? Like we have specific clauses in there, um, specific to co-living. But yeah, we use lease agreements. Are people in these models getting along? Yeah, so I'm going to touch that. That's a great question. I'll touch on that a little bit in the management section in a little while. They do. There's some specific things that we do for them and to facilitate, kind of good interactions and great community. Cool. All right, so that's kind of what you should look for in a market, mainly studio and affordability, and then look at that room rent to price ratio. And you want to make sure that there's a target demographic for this. Okay. And then what to look for in a property. So this is like whenever you go to Zillow or Coffee Closers or whatever, and you're setting your filters whenever you're looking for properties. These are the things that should be concerned about. So obviously location. Once you've identified the city, you want to identify the areas of town that are close to the demographic, the co-living demographic that you'd be targeting. So usually that's where they work, but it could be something else. It could be like where they want to hang out. So for example, with us in Colorado Springs, like I said, our target demographic is military. So we're buying only within like a 15-minute drive to any of the bases. If we were renting to, university, then okay, we'd want to be within some distance to the university. Depends on the university. At some of them students want to be within like a 10-minute walk to class. And then at some, they want to be within a 20-minute drive. It kind of depends on the city. You want to make sure that there's no HOA, absolutely no HOA. There are HOAs that, don't restrict rentals and don't restrict co-living, but you never know if they're going to start restricting them. And that could turn your property that you bought with this strategy in mind into a negative cash flow property if you had to switch it over to a long-term rental. So, there's already cities and states and federal government that can put regulations on you. I wouldn't add the homeowner association layer as well. Because usually the clause that you'll see that'll get you in the HOA, CCNRs, the regulations, is that they'll say no overnight parking on the street or no more than 2 cars street parked, at your house or something like that. So that's usually what can get you. And we'll talk a little bit about parking in a second too. But yeah, so I would recommend no HOA. And then you do want lots of square footage. So 2,200 or greater is what we have in our filters, but really our best performers are 2,800, 3,000, 3,300. The bigger you get, just kind of the better what I call like floor plan efficiency. So let's say you have 7 people, or yeah, let's say you have a 2,200 square foot house, like with 4 bedrooms or something. There's only one kitchen and there's only one living room. So now, like I said, we keep a kitchen, we keep a living room. Every little bit of square footage that you add is now income producing square footage. So you really only need one living room and one kitchen. So the bigger you get in square footage, all that extra square footage can be, directly go to bedrooms after you've conserved that living room. So that's why bigger's usually better. And then, like I said, the current number of bedrooms does not matter. It's not in my filters at all. Um, you'll just have to look at the pictures, look at the floor plan, figure out how many bedrooms you could have. Okay, and so here's parking. So this is the question I always get. How do you deal with parking? For we'll say like 8 people at a 3,000 square foot house, how do you deal with that? It's a very limiting factor. We look at 800 or 900 properties before we close on a single one. Like that's our stat. So we're looking at a lot of them, making offers on a lot of them, and the big uh, discriminator that like filters properties out is parking. Only like 10% of properties pass. So of those 900 properties, only 90 of them had sufficient parking. And then of those 90, we successfully negotiated and got the number that we needed to make a cash flow. So places that we'll consider. So let's say that we're looking at this house here. Anything in the driveway, obviously free game. So usually two there. You can usually fit one or two, you know, in front of the house, street parking. But then the key is, as far as adding additional spaces, we don't want to park in front of anyone else's house. Like that's the big restriction that we have. So technically, it's illegal. It is allowed for me to go park in front of this person's house in our town and in these neighborhoods. Um, but like whenever we were house hacking a property and I did that, the neighbor came out and pried the decals off my truck. So like, you definitely don't want to make, cause a ruckus in the neighborhood. Um, so our rule is have enough parking to where you never have to park in front of someone else's house. So we'll consider, like I said, driveway spots, street parking in front of our house, street parking along our house, along the side, if it's a, corner lot, or kind of the special one that we've done that's been totally fine, the neighbors haven't cared, is if there's two houses that have, or if there's a house like with a side yard. So in this case, there's two facing opposite directions, and they have this side yard with a fence. We'll park there. I mean, we see trailers and RVs and all that parked along there in the neighborhoods that we usually buy in. So that's another spot that we'll accept. Okay, question here. Are you following the pad split 3-to-1 bed to bath ratio, or are you doing ensuite bathrooms for all bedrooms? Yeah, we follow 3-to-1. So basically, there's two different types of rooms. There's ones that, are like the primary type bedrooms for the house that have their own bathroom. Um, so awesome. That's sweet. They rent for more. Super cool. But then there's, rooms that share a bathroom, and yeah, we'll allow up to three to rent. Um, rooms that share a bath. So we try not to go over that. So sometimes we do have to build additional bathrooms to keep that ratio, or a cheaper way to do it. A lot of half baths have space to add a shower or a tub. So that's a good way to get another bathroom without building a whole new one. Like the plumbing's already there and everything. Usually, what we do with those is there'll be like a closet either inside the bathroom or outside the bathroom that we'll demo and like put a shower in. What level of tenant vetting are you performing? Any more or less vetting than, oh, done for active military than the general population? So no, we screen them all the same, whether they're military or not. The military tends to pass more. But yeah, the screening that we do, it's mostly standard. There's a few special things that we do, but really the main thing that we do, I think that's special, is we actually contact the rental references, which I know everyone says and no one does, but we actually contact them because they're going to be a really good indicator of this person's character. And, since we have people sharing common spaces, they need to have good character and ethics and all of that. Um, so talking to their previous landlords who might have met them in person can kind of give you a good indicator of that. And one way that we encourage people to submit their rental references is we actually adjust the security deposit based on how many positive reviews we get. So, and it says that on the application and everything. So, before we did that, people would just skip the rental reference section. And then I would email them and be like, hey, do you have any? And they're like, oh, yeah, here they are. I just didn't feel like, finding their email address and putting it in. So now that we're like, hey, your security deposit's going to be really low, like we get it down to a half month of rent if they have three positive references because they're not a risky tenant to us, right? Like that's what a security deposit is for, is protecting against risky residents. Um, so if they have three raving reviews, then awesome. We don't need to keep much of a security deposit, if any at all. But if they have zero references, for example, and that might be because they've had bad experiences in other houses, like they've performed poorly as a resident, and so they didn't want to supply any. Okay, well that's fine, but it's going to be two times the monthly rent. So usually what happens is people will screen themselves out when we get that far into it. If they didn't provide references and now they have to pay, a $1,600 security deposit for an $800 room, then they'll be like, I'm just going to go look somewhere else. So kind of a win-win there. Um, Purchasing properties with creative finance. Uh, nope, everything has just been MLS with pretty typical financing. We're usually using DSCR loans, debt service coverage ratio, especially because we buy with partners these days for the most part. It makes it really easy on partnerships to not have to provide W-2s and pay statements and all that. But no, we haven't done any sub two. We're trying to do some assumables right now. None of them have penciled because the equity gap is getting so large, but we at least evaluate that in the underwriting now. Um, yeah, haven't done any seller financing either. So it can work with MLS, which is standard financing and standard deals on market. Good idea on the references. Thank you. How do you know the references are authentic? Yeah, so it's a good question. I don't go as far as to vet. Like I've heard of people, and this is a good idea. It's just laborious, so I haven't done it. But I've heard of people going as far as looking up on the property assessor's site the previous resident or the resident's previous address, and then looking to see who owns that and making sure that that matches up with the person that they provided. Honestly, we haven't gone that far with it, but it is a good idea. What are the name of the lenders that you use for DSCR loans? I will, let me drop her name in here. She's licensed in Colorado. She's a lending broker. She's also licensed in like Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, I think. Her name is Jessica Connie. She's been fantastic. And she works for a company that, has lenders in every state. Um, okay, and here's her email. Yeah, so definitely reach out to her. Um, yeah, she's fantastic. Do you install coded locks on each bedroom door? Yes. Yeah, we use Sifely locks, Sifely. I'll type that in too. Actually, let me just drop this. I have a furnishing list. I think I spelled this right. Yeah, I have a furnishing list that has the locks that we use, the couches that we buy, the everything for the kitchen that we buy. Yeah, all of that's in there. But yeah, so they're, digital locks. Front door has a digital lock. All the bedrooms have digital locks. Even storage sheds, like we rent those out for extra income. Like if somebody, instead of renting a storage unit, they can just rent the shed in the backyard and put their stuff in there. We have smart locks on those to give them access whenever they rent it. Um, do I focus on turnkey properties or do I rehab/burr as well? Everything that we've bought has been turnkey. Like we went in and did a remodel to make it better for our strategy, but a family could have moved into it immediately, right? Like we're just adding bedrooms. So it would be an awesome, you know, cross of two strategies if we could do some mega rehabs as well. It's just not in my skill set at the moment, but I would love to at some point partner with someone who does that, in a market that we work in or, learn the skill myself. Did you share the lender's info and put in the furnishing link? Yes, I did, Dennis. Maybe someone else can. Oh, I think I sent it to host and panelists. So if someone else could send that to the right chat. Thank you. Yeah, I put her email as well, and then I also put the furnishing list. Do you recommend operating with the pad split model as a beginner, or would you recommend an alternate solution? Um, so it depends on what you mean by pad split model. I think the model that they teach is a poor one, just because it doesn't provide like it, like I said, takes away from kind of the community aspects of things and makes for a poor resident experience. I don't mind, you know, we don't, but I wouldn't mind if, someone used the pad split platform to like manage on. It's basically like Airbnb as far as it's a at its essence, it's a platform where you list your rooms, you collect rent through there, kind of like Airbnb. The difference being that they do teach things as well. And like I said, I don't really like what they teach so much. And then the other difference being when you're with their platform, you can't list with other platforms or collect outside of the platform. So you can't advertise elsewhere. So it kind of cuts down on your lead flow a little bit. Yeah, and then PadSplit is not a manager. So I think people get that mixed up a lot because you just said using PadSplit management. They're not a manager. They're literally, like I said, like the Airbnb. Like if you were operating a short-term rental and you used Airbnb, you would still be managing the property yourself or have a property manager to coordinate cleanings, to, you know, do turnovers, to in this case, schedule house events, maintenance, all of that is still uh, that's still on the investor. PadSplit doesn't do that. They basically collect the rent and are a listing platform. Cool. Thank you, Maddie. All right. So here is a remodel to give you guys an example. So on the left here is the house. This is one level. I'll show you the lower level as well. But on the left here is the main level of the house, and then the right is still the main level, but after we remodeled it. So like I said, we always want to keep a living space. So what we did here was there was two living rooms. There was this one on the left in the bottom left, and there's one in the upper right. So we ended up converting this one on the left to a bedroom. And the reason we did that was because there was a lot of bathrooms in this house. And if we turned this into a bedroom, we could turn this into a private bath, and all of a sudden it, would rent for more. And there were, enough bedrooms or enough bathrooms in the rest of the house to where we could make one private and it would be okay. So essentially we, added a door into this little hallway spot, added a closet here, closed off this previous door that was with the half bath, put a new door in, and then, like I said, demoed this closet. That's usually a good opportunity to turn half baths into full baths. Demoed the closet and basically put a bathtub, combo shower type deal in there. And then dining room, we're okay with converting dining rooms into bedrooms as long as we still have a dining area. Then that's okay because this is an 8 bedroom house here. It's like 2,900 square feet, I think. Um, and yeah, 8 people never sit down and eat together all at once. So we usually put like a like 4 or 5 person like type table. And it doesn't need its own dedicated room because in reality, like maybe 1 or 2 people sit down and eat together typically. Now, whenever we do like pizza nights or whatever, maybe that's the one time where everyone comes down and eats together. But in that case, like if they eat in the living room for that night, like that's okay. It's worth it to get another bedroom in that case. So we converted that bedroom. We basically put the closet into the previous living room to make this bigger. All of our rooms are 10 by 10 or greater. This one's like 12 by 13 or something. It was pretty big. Um, and like I said, we still have that living room. And then our dining area is kind of like right here. There's like some sliding doors that go outside, and we just have like a 4 person, 5 person table here. Are the walls you're building in this example permanent or semi-permanent? With the idea of being able to reverse the change. So they are permanent. In reality, so what I mean by permanent is they're framed, they're sheetrocked, they're painted, all of that. It's not like some like conference room type wall. Now, whenever we go to sell this place, probably what we're going to do is turn this bedroom here back into a living room, turn this dining room back into a dining room. We'll keep the bath, as a full bath and keep the new door that goes to it. So now there's 2 ways to enter. So that's cool. Um, so we'll actually undo most of the stuff on this level. Now on the lower level, there's some things that we'll probably keep. So again, non-remodel on the left, remodeled on the right. There was already 1 bedroom down here, and then there was another like living room, family room, sitting room. I think it was kind of a theater is what they had it set up as. And then there was like a storage utility room combo, unfinished area. And then here was the bathroom. So you would literally come down the stairs and like you were in the bathroom. So not very functional. So just doing this bathroom remodel added value to the property, which is super cool. But basically, we closed the bathroom in. This toilet was in its own little room with like a couple of walls. So we opened that up, moved the sink around and all that. But turned the storage room into a bedroom, turned this huge, huge room into a bedroom as well. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the remodel we did here. Now all of this will probably leave. Maybe we take this one out to make it like another third sitting room again. Maybe not. But this bedroom looks great, super useful. The bathroom looks great now, super useful. Um, so that's the kind of remodels that you could expect, though. I think this costs like 30,000 to do in our market, but it built, 4 bedrooms. So that brings in like 30,000 a year. So it was well worth it, 100% ROI basically. Okay. I will kind of breeze through this, but whenever you do analyze co-living properties, there's some unique inputs. So a lot of the inputs will be standard, what's your loan down payment and all that. But room rents, right, that'll be different. And there's that website again. We do pay for utilities, internet, lawn care. We have a cleaner come through on a monthly basis. We pay for all the shared supplies for the house. So toilet paper, paper towels, trash bags, all that kind of stuff. we pay for, um, and furnishings, right? So those are some extra expenses that you could expect. How are we looking on time? I didn't ask. How long is this supposed to go for? Cool. I'll keep going while I wait on a response. Okay, so here's an analysis example. So this is that house that we remodeled. This is it. Purchased it for 470, yada yada yada, it was 7% DSCR. Okay, so all in all, with remodel and closing costs and all of that, we're 175 all in. Then you guys can look at these later, but there's income and expenses. Moral of the story is 7,000 a month in income versus 22 or whatever. We do have increased expenses as well, but well worth it. Um, okay, and then just high level, the cash flow on this one is 28 grand a year, so a little over 2 grand a month, and it was like a 16% cash on cash. So pretty sweet. Okay, and then just a quick one pager because you guys asked some questions on this already. But also someone just said, what about beds? Like number of bedrooms for this property, or do we supply beds to the rooms? Like, do we furnish the rooms? Well, I guess I will say, because this will be useful for everyone. We do not furnish the bedrooms, but it just depends on the market. So, in our market with the military guys, I guess the rule of thumb is if someone's going to stay for 6 months or longer, or a year or longer, to be even more conservative, like they you probably don't need furnished rooms. I would advocate against furnished rooms if at all possible. So having unfurnished rooms, I think, are better for a few reasons. One, you have lower startup costs, right? Like you don't have to furnish a bedroom and a dresser and all that. But two, people who move into unfurnished rooms tend to stay longer because they decorate the room themselves. Now it's kind of home to them, like it's set up like they want. It doesn't feel like a hotel or you know an Airbnb anymore. It feels like it's their place. Um, and there's just more friction to them moving, honestly. Like if they do want to move, it's like, oh, I moved all this stuff in. I'm gonna have to get someone to help me carry my bed downstairs. So there's like a little bit of friction there. So those are the reasons I prefer not to. But some markets you might have to. Like if you're renting to interns, like okay, probably need to furnish it. Even some markets where people stay longer, it's just common to have furnished rooms. Um, and so downsides of that being that yeah, they can move out a lot easier. But it's easier on the house as well if they are furnished. Like in our unfurnished houses, people move in beds in and out. Like, the walls are going to get dinged a little bit. So, so this was an 8 bedroom house and they are unfurnished. What do you look for, bed slash bath to make it a home run? Uh, like I said, whenever we buy, I don't care how many bedrooms there are. Whenever we're done, as many rooms as we can get comfortably. Like I said, we want them to be at least 10 by 10 and while still conserving the living space, then that's okay with me as long as there's 3 people to a bathroom or less. Yes. So this ROI is an interest only DSCR loan. Yes. So that is one thing that we've started using is the interest only. My way of thinking about it is if we weren't doing interest only, we would be paying down the principal, which would be this loan pay down piece, which is awesome. Like it's still a return that you technically get, but it's very inaccessible. It's not liquid, right? Like you have to do a cash out refi, something like that, or sell to extract that return that you're getting. So instead, I would much rather not pay principal and instead just shift loan pay down straight into cash flow, and then we just have it in our pocket without taking that inefficient um, cash out refi step. So that's kind of the way that me and my partners look at it. We'd rather have it now and be able to reinvest it now than wait every 3 or 4 years and do a cash out refi. Um, what's a normal down payment expectations for DSCR loans? Yeah, and underwriting requirements. They are usually 25% down. The first one we did was 20%, and then it kind of went away because lending practices got tighter. But I've heard they've loosened back up, and now they have a 15%. Some people do. I'm sure it's a higher interest rate, but usually 25% down is kind of the standard. Underwriting requirements, they just want to see that that the income exceeds the PITI, the mortgage payment. So that's what they use to determine if you if you qualify. You don't technically qualify, really, like the property qualifies if it cash flows. With interest only, is there any risk during market downturns with not having much equity in the property? Uh, Only if it's a huge downturn, right? Like we're putting 25% down. So the property would have to dip 25% first off for us to go underwater. Like it'd have to dip over 25%. Even in the Great Recession, like 25% is huge. Um, uh, like in the market that we're in Colorado Springs during the Great Recession, we dropped 2% or 3%. So I feel pretty comfortable. But even if we were in like a normal market that does see fluctuations like that, you'd have to drop a ton to go underwater. But two, like I said, this strategy works, I think, in all markets. Like we've seen it work in different types of markets, but it's especially works well in recessionary type markets. So the only reason I would care if we're underwater is if we couldn't rent the property and we needed to sell it. But even if we had a 30% drop, we should be able to rent better than normal. So there should be no reason for us to have to sell. I mean, that's what I'm saying, but who knows? There could be some like black swan event um, that would throw a wrench in this. But yeah, that's what I would say right now. I don't care that we're not building equity through loan pay down. We're still getting appreciation and building equity that way. But even just if we were at static 25 constant forever, we'd be okay, I think. Can you owner occupy and co-living? Yes, in fact, we do. My wife and I'm in a co-living property right now. We live in the basement. It's bedroom, living room, kitchen down here, and then upstairs we have 4 beds. So yeah, you can. Yeah, and I haven't seen much friction with us living there. Doesn't matter too much. Have you had issues financing a house with so many bedrooms and the unusual layout and lack of comparables? No, because we're not, we're getting the financing before we've done the remodel, right? Like we get the financing on the purchase. So the extra rooms don't exist yet. But refis can become an issue when you don't have comps. Honestly, it is a downside of the strategy. 10-year interest only for 30 years or 10-year with 40-year. So the one that we use, it's 10 years interest only, and then it's amortized over the next 20. So it's a 30-year loan, 10 are interest only, 20 are amortized. Coverage of payment is based on comparable room rentals in the area. So good question. So with DSCR, there's no room rental DSCR yet that I've heard of. That there's companies that have them in the works, from what I've heard. But there are two types of DSCRs for the most part. There's ones that use long-term rents to qualify, so they'll look at, you know, long-term rental comparables, traditional rentals. In your market, those might cash flow. So cool, you could use that. Instead, in our market, what we're having to do to get them to qualify is use like a short-term rental DSCR product. So they look at short-term rental rates and qualify us based on that. And in reality, our strategy makes more than co-living, or excuse me, more than short-term rentals in our market. So, that's great. We actually will do better than what the underwriting shows. But I mean, basically, my lender was like, if you decide to do a different strategy after closing, that's totally fine. Like a lender can't tell you what you do with your property. So yeah, as long as you intend to short-term rent it, if you decided to do co-living later, that would be, and potentially a way to still use a short-term rental DSCR. Da, 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 da. Hey Liam, are we over time?
Yeah, so we are technically at the hour. Um, do you have anything else in your presentation that you wanted to go over? Or
That was the bulk. Let me just drop this. Okay, so I just launched, like I said, we're launching the um, co-living book with bigger pockets. Oh, if somebody wants to type it in the chat, it's colivingbook.com. That's where you can sign up. We're trying to uh, get BP to allow me to give discounts to the people on my list. So hopefully that's incoming. But also, we have a free Facebook community. So basically, the goal here is to provide more value than the co-living courses. There's a couple that I know of. They're actually pretty good, but I'm trying to do it for free. So nothing to sell, 100% free. Big thing is it's active community with just like this questions and answers, all of that, of course, but then also live events, property walkthroughs, deal analysis, where people bring their deals and we talk about the floor plans and everything. So anyway, that'll be an awesome spot for you guys to get in touch. So there you go. It's notrocket.co/community is where you can find that. And then there's my Instagram as well. So yeah, there we go. Thank you, Maddie. And yeah, I think that's all I have. I know there was some questions I didn't get to, but you guys can join the Facebook group and ask them there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Miller, for your time and for that very valuable information on co-living. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else has as well. So yeah, we have been recording this call. We will send out a follow-up email to everybody, inviting them to rewatch the recording and, of course, check out your Facebook group. So yeah, without further ado, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Miller. And yeah, all the best, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
All right, thanks. See ya.
Bye bye now.